Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. You know, sometimes the most unsettling stories are the ones that feel the most real, the ones that could happen to any of us.
Absolutely, and that's what we're exploring today, three unsettling encounters that remind us that even in the most ordinary settings, the unexpected can happen.
These aren't ghost stories or urban legends. They're real experiences from real people, and they're definitely going to make you think twice about your own sense of safety.
It's a chance to kind of look at how fragile that sense of security can be, how easily it can be shattered, but also how resilient we can be in the face of the unexpected.
So let's dive right into our first story, and this one takes place in a setting that's probably pretty familiar to most of us, a typical suburban home.
Yeah, we often think of our homes as these safe havens,
Yeah.
But this story is a reminder that even in those familiar spaces, a sense of unease can creep in and turn into something truly unsettling.
This particular story revolves around a young boy and his family, and on the surface, everything seems totally normal. But then these little unsettling events start to happen. At first, it's just strange smells, like something rotting, but nobody can figure out where it's coming from.
It's those subtle things, right? The things that make you question your senses, they can be so unnerving.
Yeah, and then it escalates to these nighttime disturbances, like things being moved around the house, faint noises that can't really be explained.
It's like that feeling of being watched or like something's just not quite right. It preys on your mind.
Exactly. And it all comes to a head one really hot summer night. The boy wakes up thirsty in the middle of the night and goes to get a glass of water. But as he's filling his glass at the sink, he hears a noise coming from his bedroom. It's not a distinct noise, but it's enough to make him uneasy. So instead of going back to his room, he decides to sleep on the couch.
That's interesting. He's already starting to trust his gut feeling that something's off. That's a good instinct to have.
Definitely. And it might have even saved him from a much more direct encounter. Because later that same night, he wakes up again. And this time he hears someone rummaging through the refrigerator in the kitchen. He can see the light from the fridge flickering under the door, hears bottles clinking. It's terrifying.
It's a classic home invasion scenario. Someone violating the sanctity of your home. One of our most primal fears.
Absolutely. So the next day, he tells his mom about the weird smell in his room, but she can't find anything out of place. Later that night, after a family movie night, he heads off to bed. He's exhausted and falls asleep pretty quickly. And tonight, there's no fan running, so the silence is almost deafening.
You can always feel the tension building, right?
Yeah.
The silence making everything feel even more eerie.
Oh, absolutely. And then he's suddenly jolted awake by the sound of someone breathing. And it's not just the gentle rhythm of sleep, it's heavy, ragged breaths coming from somewhere in the room. He lies there frozen, terrified, trying to convince himself that it's nothing, just the house settling.
The psychological torture of that moment. Knowing something's wrong, but not knowing what it is.
It's a nightmare. He finally forces himself to sit up and scan the room. Nothing in the closet, nothing under the desk. And then his eyes land on the bed, the only place left to look. He slowly lifts the dust ruffle with trembling hands, and he comes face to face with a large man hiding under his bed.
Wow. The ultimate violation of personal space. The realization that someone has been secretly sharing your most intimate environment.
It's chilling. He screams, his parents rush in, and it's complete chaos. They manage to get the man out of the house and call the police, but the damage is done. And what makes this story even more unsettling is that it's not just some made-up tale. It was passed down from the boy's great-grandfather. This really happened to him.
And that's what's so powerful about these personal narratives. Yeah. It's a reminder that trauma can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be some big catastrophic event. Sometimes it's the smaller, more personal violations that leave the deepest scars.
And in this case, the great-grandfather lived to be over 100 years old. He fought in World War II, escaped communism, faced incredible hardships throughout his life. But this event, this man hiding under his bed as a child, that remained one of the most unsettling experiences he ever endured.
It really makes you think about the nature of fear and trauma, doesn't it? How certain events can just stay with us no matter what else we experience in life.
It really does. And it's a reminder that even in a life filled with extraordinary events, sometimes it's the seemingly ordinary ones that have the most profound impact.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that some things just stay with you.
So for our next story, we're going to shift gears completely. We're moving from the quiet suburbs to a frigid, war-torn forest in post-battle Russia. This account comes from another great-grandfather, and it takes us right into the heart of war, where fear takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, the setting itself almost becomes a character in the story, right? The desolate landscape, the biting cold, the constant threat of danger. It creates this atmosphere of heightened anxiety where literally anything could be lurking in the shadows.
It's a world away from that quiet unease of the suburban home. The story unfolds in the aftermath of this fierce battle. A group of Soviet soldiers are celebrating a hard-fought victory. There's this sense of relief, camaraderie, a brief moment of respite from the horrors of war. But even in that moment of celebration, something feels off, like a sense of unease just below the surface.
Right, is that constant tension, that awareness that even in victory, danger is always right around the corner. The psychological burden that soldiers carry with them.
And that burden becomes all too real when this blood-curdling scream pierces the night. It's coming from the woods surrounding their encampment, and the mood instantly shifts. The soldiers grab their weapons and form a search party, heading out into the darkness to investigate.
That immediate shift from celebration to high alert, it's such a stark contrast, and it really speaks to the constant state of vigilance that wartime creates.
As they get deeper into the woods, the screaming stops. It's replaced by this eerie silence that's almost worse. The search party splits up into smaller groups to cover more ground, their flashlights cutting through the dense undergrowth. And then one of the groups stumbles upon a sight that'll stay with them forever.
The moment of discovery, when the unknown becomes terrifyingly real.
They find two German soldiers. One's already dead, the other barely clinging to life. But both of them have these horrific injuries. The narrator, our storyteller's great-grandfather, describes it as something straight out of a nightmare. The bodies are mutilated almost beyond recognition. One of the soldiers has even been scalped, his lifeless eyes staring up at the night sky.
It's the language that's so striking. Mutilated, scalped. These words suggest a level of violence that goes beyond the typical battlefield injuries. There's something primal, almost animalistic about it.
And there's another detail that makes the scene even more unsettling. There's this strange, almost chemical smell hanging in the air around the bodies. It's not the smell of blood or gunpowder, it's something completely unfamiliar.
It's that olfactory detail that really sets this story apart. It hints at something otherworldly, something beyond human comprehension.
It's chilling. As the soldiers try to make sense of what they're seeing, they hear this low, guttural moan coming from deeper in the woods. And suddenly, this tall, shadowy figure bursts out of the trees, sprinting straight towards them.
That fleeting glimpse of the attacker, whatever it was, adds this whole other layer of mystery and terror to the story. The unknown is always more frightening than the known.
It really is. The soldiers open fire, but the figure disappears back into the darkness as quickly as it appeared. It leaves them completely shaken and bewildered. The incident's reported, but it's never officially investigated. Just another unsolved mystery of war.
The story, like the first one, really highlights the lasting impact of these kinds of traumatic events, but it also raises questions about the very nature of reality, especially in the context of war.
Right. The extreme stress of combat, the constant threat of death, it can really distort perceptions, make it hard to tell what's real and what's imagined.
Exactly. So was it an enemy soldier driven to this state of primal rage? Or some kind of wild animal maddened by the carnage of war? Or was it something else entirely, something that defies rational explanation?
It's impossible to know for sure, and that ambiguity, that lack of answers, is part of what makes these stories so compelling. It's a reminder that even in a world increasingly defined by science and reason, there are still things we can't explain.
And that's where our third story takes us, back to a more contemporary setting. But it explores a fear that's sadly timeless. The fear of being stalked, of having your sense of safety violated in this deeply personal way.
This story is a reminder that danger can lurk even in seemingly safe places, and sometimes it comes from the people we least expect.
And it's a fear that can really get under your skin, that feeling of being watched, hunted. It can be so psychologically damaging.
This story focuses on a young couple who just moved into their first home together. It's a huge milestone, right? They're excited, full of hopes and dreams for the future. But that sense of security is shattered when they realize they're not alone.
Yeah, it's like this violation of one of our most basic needs, that need for safety and privacy, especially in our own homes.
It starts small. Just a glimpse of a man lurking in their backyard, watching them through the windows. They try to brush it off as a nosy neighbor, but that feeling of unease just won't go away.
It's so easy to dismiss those early warning signs. We tell ourselves we're being paranoid, but sometimes those gut feelings are trying to tell us something important.
And in this case, they definitely were, because the lurking escalates into something much darker. The man starts shouting threats through their windows, banging on their doors in the middle of the night. They even find signs that he's tried to break in while they were sleeping.
Wow, that's terrifying. And it's a classic example of how stalkers operate right, slowly escalating their behavior to instill fear and control.
The couple is living in absolute terror. They call the police multiple times, but without concrete evidence, there's not much the police can do. It's a nightmare scenario, feeling trapped and helpless in your own home.
It really highlights how challenging it can be for stalking victims to get the help they need. The burden of proof often falls on them to gather evidence while living in constant fear.
And that sense of helplessness, that feeling that you're not safe even in your own home, it can be incredibly damaging.
Absolutely. It can really shake your sense of trust, not just in other people, but in your own ability to protect yourself. But the truly unsettling thing is that the stalker just vanishes. The harassment, the threats, they just stop, and the couple is left with this eerie silence.
It's like trading one kind of fear for another, isn't it? You're no longer being actively harassed, but you're constantly wondering if and when it's going to start again.
Yeah, it creates this new kind of anxiety, this lingering fear that's hard to shake. It's a psychological limbo. So we heard 3 very different stories. But what connects them? What can we learn from these unsettling encounters, and how can we apply those lessons to our own lives?
That's a great question. What really struck me was how each story involved a violation of boundaries, whether physical, emotional, or even societal. The man intruding into the boy's bedroom, the brutal attack in the war zone, the stalker invading the couple's home. It's all about crossing lines that should never be crossed.
Right, and when those boundaries are violated, it can have a profound impact on our sense of safety and well-being. It's not just about the potential for physical harm, but the psychological damage of having your personal space, your privacy, your sense of control taken away.
So how do we protect ourselves, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically as well?
It starts with awareness, being attuned to our surroundings, paying attention to those gut feelings that tell us something isn't right, trusting our instincts, and removing ourselves from situations that feel unsafe.
You mentioned gut feelings earlier, and I think that's so important. We often try to rationalize those feelings away, but sometimes our intuition is trying to tell us something really important.
Exactly, and we need to learn to listen to it. But awareness is just the first step. It's also about being prepared, not living in a state of constant fear, but taking sensible precautions to protect ourselves and our loved ones.
Like making sure our homes are secure, being aware of our surroundings when we're out, and having a plan in case of an emergency.
Exactly, and just as important is connection. Talking to others, sharing our experiences and concerns. We don't have to go through these things alone.
Breaking the silence, finding strength in numbers. Sometimes just talking about what we're going through can help to lessen that anxiety.
Absolutely. Sharing our stories can be a catalyst for healing, growth, and even positive change. So even though these stories have been unsettling, I think they've also been incredibly insightful. They remind us that even though we're all vulnerable, we also have this amazing capacity for resilience, connection, and creating a safer world for ourselves and for each other.
I think that's a great takeaway. We can't control every event in our lives, but we can control how we respond to them. And on that note, we want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into these unsettling encounters. We hope you found it thought-provoking and maybe even a little empowering.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the nature of these threats, the better equipped we are to face them head-on and build a safer, more resilient world.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.